Second aspect relating to the personality relates to a number of psychological tests, and I think that of particular interest there is the work done at the mines, the work done with illiterates, the work done with young children. I'm thinking of Renee Liddycoat, for instance, who developed a little questionnaire trying to assess the mental potential of your little black children coming from a disadvantaged environment. So tests, selection, assessment of potential, assistance in the development of thinking skills, looking at cognitive reactions. Those are the kinds of things that was assessed in that particular group, particularly because that was, I think, more in line with what was the general way in which research was done. Another aspect, the third aspect, perhaps I should just mention some names as far as that's concerned. There we have names like, for instance, Professor Johan Skeppers, who did sterling work. We have Jerry Grant, who did unbelievable work. And we must not forget the work done by Dr. Biesheuvel himself, who continued going on with research or guiding research with the aim of ensuring that if psychological tests were used, that it is not assumed that coming from the Western world, it will give the correct answer when dealing with people in a multicultural context as we have it in South Africa. He was continually assisting people to look at things from a different perspective because he had a very inquisitive mind. But he was a very strong person in terms of, if you do research, there are certain processes and ways of doing it to ensure that the results you get are valid and reliable. Part of the research in the environmental field, it took a different way. The environmental studies were, amongst others, done by people like Getta Glass and Sally Hall. They were more of a social psychological perspective, and they tended to do macro surveys. Macro surveys either at the request of big organizations or macro surveys in cooperation with international groups that wanted to have South African data to compare to what they get elsewhere in the world. That invariably required that they would have to go out for days on end into deep rural areas to get information. And they consisted of very beautiful teams, cooperative teams from different cultural groups that worked together. So the environment in that respect would give information that would be able to be used by your psychological groups, the testings. But with time, it also became evident, that was when Biesheuvel was gone and Davie Gous became the director, became evident that we needed to earn more money. So you couldn't just hope that somebody would give a grant. So they developed the research departments and the applied department. Research would be statistics, analysis of statistics and things like that. The EEG department would be somewhat applied, somewhat research, more research, but a little bit of applied, giving a certain service to clients. But then they determined other divisions that actually were requested to develop questions, develop answers to questions put forward by clients. Can you help us, for instance, with a job evaluation system? What would work in South Africa? And that's the kind of thing Dr. Biesheuvel loved. So he immediately said, we have to start developing a job evaluation system. And he had Lucian Cortes, Dr. Lucian Cortes, and some of us to work on it, to develop it. It was decided that it would be based on a decision-making model, And after having developed it, then you have to apply it. But to apply it, you have to be able to analyze the jobs, which meant that you went down the mines to see how a person in the mine would work, the gas factory, how do they stoke the fires. Those were the kinds of things where, with a job evaluation system in mind, you practically analyzed what was happening. Similarly, you would have to go to people, for instance, senior investment manager, to ask him how does he know how to invest. And if he says by gut feel, you've got to ask questions to determine, well, what are gut feels? That's one aspect. Other aspects would be the so-called 6M game is actually a game that was developed to assist people with little knowledge about the experiences they would experiences they would have in the workplace, particularly if they have no knowledge whatsoever, if they come from rural backgrounds. Now, the 6 M's are money, materials, manpower, management, machines, money, and market. And then later they developed a 7th one, which was motivation. This assisted people, if they came from the rural areas and had to go into factories, they would be there and they would be trained by playing with little cars and little shops and money, and they would play the game in being told, if you buy this, you have to have money to pay for it. If you pay for that, you may not have money to pay the salaries. So it was trying to teach the people how to deal with the realities of the environment in the work situation. This was such a good effort that it expanded. More and more people needed to have the training done. And it was also expanded eventually in the sense that it was upgraded to become part of your line supervisors, to assist them to understand what the subordinates had to do. And eventually it also developed into, we speak 6M language. That's the kind of thing. Now, that's a kind of practicalities. There was nothing like that. You had to develop it and you had to train people in it. And it was then sold to outside people who again would use it, and we would go on to something else. Similarly, it happened with the job evaluation system. The job evaluation system that was developed, it was called the Q method, which eventually, as Dr. Biesheuvel moved to the SA breweries, it was taken with him, and I think it was called the Paromnus there. And it is, in effect, in essence, there are some changes to it. It is still being used within many organizations. Again, typically, some of the products that were developed for use in a multicultural context, where there is a Western approach and a rural need. Now, this also brings one to the work, amongst others, done by Ben McQuatley. Ben McQuatley was unbelievably valuable in the sense that as a registered industrial psychologist, he could go into where there were needs in terms of labor resources, problems they had, and speak the language of management and be able to coordinate the needs of the people to share with when there were problems or whatever the case might be. He and somebody else like Pauline Mkalipi, again, a registered industrial psychologist, no, she was a registered psychologist who specifically assisted with training, and particularly training of your rural women. So some of our colleagues were absolutely wonderful in being able to assist us to bring Western thinking to practicalities in terms of more rural experiences, assisting in the upliftment of people.